have a great British debate this hour. I'm asking, can Boris Johnson keep the keys to number 10? I'm joined now by the former editor of the Labour list, Peter Edwards. Peter, good to talk to you. Right, so Labour, they retook the seat of Wakefield, West Yorkshire. It lost at the 2019 general election. Is this a good sign for the party?
Yeah, it's a good sign, but of course there's an awful lot more to do for Labour if it's going to win. I was listening to your interview with Michael Fabricant, the Tory backbencher. He mentioned opinion polls. I had a quick look back. Been around 50-odd opinion polls this year. Keir Starmer's been ahead in every single one of them, apart from one, a lead up to 13 points at times. So not quite matching what Tony Blair did the year before election. But of course, we're probably not a year before election. We're a little bit further out. It's right that Labour has a lengthy rebuild after the failed Corbyn project, but public trust, as a by-elections show this week, in completely different seats at different ends of England, public trust is ebbing away in Boris Johnson.
Well, but I'll just bring the point that I made to Michael Fabricant, that actually, if you look at the two MPs who lost their seats, they did it for they lost their seats on terrible reasons, you know. So anybody, if you voted Conservative and you had that, it's actually, in a sense, it's their really they lost their seats. Would you blame part of that, a large part of that, on Partygate and Boris Johnson, or do you think that actually this really falls? You would?
Yeah, and like me, you know, you're a keen watcher of Westminster. There are scandals in every parliament, and of course, the two that led to by-elections in the southwest and in Wakefield were particularly horrible ones. But there are scandals in every by-election, and then immediately you have both a local vote that no one saw coming, and also a localised poll in the Prime Minister. And that's what it is. And I think the other thing I noticed, apart from the fact that by-elections are always, to a certain extent, feedback on the Prime Minister and the government of the day, is how many third-party games, i.e. the Lib Dems, are then lost again at the next general election. So it's not just feedback on Boris Johnson. I'd really urge Lib Dems not to get too cocky after today, when, for example, they won in Richmond Park in London in a by-election, then lost that as well next time around.
Yeah, well, there's no real alternative. If you don't vote Labour, you'll do that. And anyway, apparently, so many people saying there was a pact. Now, although the turnout was quite low, actually, 39%, that's what some people are saying. 39% of people, only 39% of people went out to vote. So that's not really that much, is it, in comparison?
Well, again, yeah, by-election turnout tends to be a bit lower, doesn't it? And to me, as a Democrat and a voter, that's really sad. But we always know that in a general election, when the whole country is choosing its new Prime Minister, or the same Prime Minister, turnout is higher, although it's dropped over my lifetime, the last 40 years. I think the issue, when you go to turnout, and Michael Fabricant was keen on this with some very selective choice of stats, it's not always about switchers, because in the past, Labour have suffered and Ed Miliband suffered with their voters staying at home, not necessarily switching, just staying away. And now I certainly feel in both by-elections this time around and in the last Lib Dem gain, the government lost from its voters just staying at home. So they, you know, government supporters don't need to switch to get the government in trouble. The government are already in trouble, as we saw last night. And what Labour needs to do is kind of revive a few non-voters, which is a tall order. Ed Miliband struggled a bit with that, but that's why you've got to enthuse people as well as stuff them with the policy detail.
Well, listen, Peter, I think I know the answer then, because I'm going to ask you whether Boris Johnson can keep the keys to number 10. You're going to say no. So thank you very much, Peter. It's good to talk to you. That is Peter Edwards. He's the former editor of the Labour list. Right, let's see what my panel make of that. I'm joined by former Conservative advisor Claire Pilsall and also broadcaster Danny Kelly. I'm going to start with you, Danny, this time.
I must admit, when Mr Fabricant said that the 20,000 Tory voters stayed at home, I thought that was eternal optimism. But when you actually reflect, there is some sense to that. There is some sense, and maybe he's correct. I've never known Conservative voters stay at home, though. So that's a new one to me. I've known Conservative voters tend to be more motivated, in my experience, to cast their vote. But maybe I've been wrong about that. Can he keep the keys to number 10? I think he can keep the keys to number 10. Don't forget, in 2019, Boris Johnson went to these Labour seats saying, lend me your vote to get Brexit done. Now, that was only a temporary borrowing of a vote, and I think now we're going to see the repaying of that. The vote was lent, Brexit was done, and now they're going to Labour.
It's just a psychological thing, because you can't get someone to vote and say, I've got your vote and it's my vote forever. So it's just words, isn't it, Claire?
It is, and I think that this is actually indicative of the general public's malaise with politics as a whole. I don't think it's necessarily distrust in the Conservatives, although I think this is a referendum into the Prime Minister, so I disagree with Michael Fabricant on that. But I think it's actually much more than that, and it's politics as a whole. And trust in politics and politicians is at an all-time low.
For all of them.
For absolutely everybody. The success in Wakefield wasn't a massive success for Keir Starmer. You know, let's be honest, when you start looking at the figures, and you can bandy around statistics and figures and polling information as much as you like, realistically, it wasn't much of a gain for Labour. We did lose it. And again, with Tiverton and Honiton, the Lib Dems took it from us. Our vote stayed at home. But either way, these two are a loss to us.
And I suppose they can't just rely on people's votes. Let's see what you think. This show is nothing without you and your views. Let's welcome our great British voice, your opportunity to be on the show and tell us what you really think about what we're discussing. Right, where should we head over to? Oh, let's go to Bedfordshire. Let's have a chat with property expert Julie Ford. Julie, so briefly then, because we've got about a minute with you, just what do you think? Can Boris Johnson keep hold of the keys to number 10?
Hi, Nana. Yeah, actually, I think he can. But I think the question I want to be asking is, does he want to? Because in that press conference today, that man looked exhausted. And I think maybe he's just had enough. So although I think, yeah, if he wants the keys, he can keep them. But I think for me, it's whether he genuinely wants it. Some of the questions that were coming from the press for him, he looked exasperated by them, and that's not something we normally see from Boris. He can normally talk his way out of it or joke his way out of it. And I think, again, some of the polls that we've been hearing lately as well, I think maybe he's just really just had enough.
Yeah, who would blame him? Thank you very much, Julie. Lovely to talk to you. That is Julie Ford. She's a property expert.